I've said it once and I'll say it again, BMWs are not my favorite car, but I took this one in off a trade because it had a transmission issue and seemed fixable. Like any other project you don't want to do, it starts out with a long story. Now this is the 2000 model BMW 323i with 156,000 miles. Now, I sold this car back in 2020 to an older lady. It had 120,000 miles on it then, and she drove the crap out of this thing. She didn't maintenance it much either. The state inspection is still the one that I put on it right before I sold it to her. Now, I got it back in January of 2023 when she traded it in on another vehicle that she'll probably never change the oil in. And I checked it out initially and I saw the transmission issue on the dash and a radiator leak underneath the car, and I parked it up on the top of the hill and forgot about it. Then a couple months ago, back in February of 24, I was walking through the lot one day and walked past it and suddenly remembered it and decided to see if I could bring it in and see what was going on with it. After we checked the fluid and made sure it was full, we took it up the road and we discovered that I was slipping into fourth gear. And after it slipped a couple times, it would leave it stuck in failsafe or third gear where it wouldn't shift at all. Definitely wasn't a drivable vehicle. So we brought it back in, we dropped the pan, and we saw that the fluid was pretty black and had some metal in it. This was all the evidence I needed to take this transmission out and take it apart. But before I did that, I needed a way to know how to get this thing out and how to get it apart. And a good way to do that is go to emanualonline.com. Emanualonline.com is an online store full of automotive repair service manuals for any make and model that you can think of. These manuals provide a great deal of information like how to diagnose problems and remove and replace components such as the transmission. Check out emanualonline.com today and use my code Eddie22 at checkout for a 22% off discount. Okay, so first we're going to want to unplug this connector up here. You can see it up in there. That's the transmission connector, and it just kind of pulls down like that, and then it'll break off of there just like so. There's another connector right here, and this is a little more difficult to get off. That is the neutral safety switch connector, and it's what tells the transmission if it's in neutral or park or not. And this one kind of twist that way, just like that, and it comes off of there. And then we got to take our shift linkage loose because it's a 13 millimeter. Oh man, that is not a there we go. That's probably the proper way to do it there. You break that loose, and then you got two 10 millimeters right up there that you have to get loose. Perfect. All right, now we're out of there. It'll come right out of the shifter now. That assembly just kind of hangs down like that. All right, now we got pretty much everything disconnected except for the trans lines up here. And I feel like those are going to be a little easier to get once we get the subframe off and we can lower the transmission down a little bit. So our window for the torque converter, you see, is actually, you can actually see it right there. There's only 4 of them because this is going to take a while. I think we're coming up on the first one here. There's the first one right there. There's the first one right there. And that's the next one down. All right. All right, we actually we got this bolt out with the magnetic socket. That's probably a good tool to have for this. Have the magnetic socket where it holds your bolts on. we know that the torque converter is free, so we can come over here and we can spin it up in there. That torque converter will spin by hand now, so, and the flywheel's not moving with it, so it's not bolted up anymore. Now we're ready to put the jack up under it and start pulling bell housing bolts. Subframe bolts, these are 13s, and you also got transmission mount bolts, 13s as well, and those are nuts actually. I'm going to try to do it without getting the exhaust out if we can. Nice, 2 for 2. Alright, now we got bell housing bolts and transmission lines. That's all we got left. Now these bell housing bolts are E-Torx, all of them. Now, none of the bell housing bolts came out easy. There's 4 of them up top. 2 are big, 2 are small, and 2 go to the starter and the other go on the block. None of these were very loose. So you all had to break them loose with the breaker bar. The 1/2-inch gun wouldn't even break them loose. But once I got them loose with the breaker bar, the 1/2-inch pneumatic gun would get them on out of there. And it's a little tough, so if you're doing this on the ground, it's probably not recommended because it's going to be really, really tough to get these bell housing bolts broken loose from factory. Now there's 9 bell housing bolts in this thing. There's 2 big ones on the top, there's 2 that go into the starter, and there's 2 big ones on the side, and there's 3 small ones on the bottom. You get all those out, and the only thing left is a plate behind the flywheel that's bolted to the transmission via a 10mm bolt. It sits right beside the hole for the torque converter bolts, and we had a little trouble until we found that 10mm, and then everything came right out. Now we got this thing down, we're going to get it on the bench, take it apart, and see what's going on inside of it. Now these transmissions aren't that hard to take apart. They're pretty durable, not much usually goes wrong with them, and there's not that many clutch packs in them. It's only a 5-speed. So we start by taking the remaining bolts out of the pan. I left 4 in them to get the transmission out after we drained it. Once we get the pan off, we can access the filter and the valve body. Now the filter's held in by 2 small Torx head bolts, and the valve body is held in by Torx head bolts as well. And there's Torx head bolts that hold the valve body together. Now I believe there's 10 bolts that hold the valve body to the case, and they have bigger heads on them than the other valve body bolts, so they're pretty easy to spot. You also have to take the connector loose from the case. You take that little clip out, then you can beat the connector down inside the case, and then the valve body will come out freely. And there is a little speed sensor on the back side of the valve body that's bolted to the case. You'll have to get that out as well. Make sure you do not break that. And once you do, the main case is exposed, and there's these little tubes and springs over here that you have to get out. To get the spring out, you push it in and twist it, and it'll pop out. And then to get the tube out, you got to be careful. Use a pair of needle nose pliers and get them out because they're not readily available to buy if you break it. Now we're going to take the pump out, and it's held in by Torx head bolts as well. And we have a special little tool here that grabs the stator of the pump and basically pries it out against the input shaft. Once you get out far enough, you could just pull it out by hand. And then we'll pull out all the clutch packs and all the planetaries and hubs. everything will pretty much come right out all the way up until the center support. Once you get to the center support, you're going to have to take some bolts out from the valve body side, and then that center support will come right out. And then everything underneath that center support will come out as well. Nothing else is held in by bolts or a snap ring. Now once you have it all disassembled, you can kind of stack it up like this with the pump down on the bench and the output shaft facing up. Don't forget about your tail housing and clean your case when you're done. You won't have to change the output seal on the tail housing, but you will have to change an O-ring that goes inside the case right there. Now we're going to see what's wrong inside this transmission. We're now taking the E clutch free from the A clutch drum, which is basically the input shaft and everything. And the E clutch is burnt up, and that's what mainly comes on in fourth gear. This is like the fourth gear clutch in this thing, the overdrive clutch. And as you can see, those clutches are massively burnt. And that's why this thing was slipping when going in fourth gear. But that was not the only clutch pack that was burnt up inside this transmission. The F clutch as well, which is kind of on the bottom of the stack here. We take some of the stack down, and there the F clutch is sitting all the way on the bottom, and it's held in by the hub and ring gear for the rear planet. Now this F clutch comes on in fourth gear as well, and I've seen this happen before where two clutches come on in one gear and one of them burns up and ends up putting pressure on the other one, and that one burns up as well, giving you more problems, and that seems to be the case here. Now that we got this thing figured out, we know what's causing fourth gear, it's time to find parts. Now the parts we're going to need are probably going to be an E clutch drum, an F clutch drum, and the steels associated with those clutches. We're also probably going to need a complete overhaul kit with friction. Now being this is an older vehicle with an older transmission that is no longer in production, these parts can be very difficult to find. First of all, they have to be sourced usually from Germany because that's where the transmission was built. And good luck finding brand new drums to put in this thing. We're most likely going to have to go with good used parts off of eBay Motors, and we may have to go to Parts Geek or some other suppliers to find our overhaul kit. In our next video, we'll be putting this transmission back together and sticking it back in the car and seeing if we could get it to drive properly. Until then, if you need any help with your projects, feel free to email me at justcallmeeddie1@gmail.com, and you can also follow me on Instagram and Facebook where I post weekly content about the day-to-day things that I do. Thanks for watching, and whatever you do, however you do it, make sure you work hard, make sure you play hard, and most importantly, make sure you stay dirty. You can just call me Eddie.